Today we're talking about the Hellraiser films. This is a series of films that started in the late 1980s, starring Doug Bradley as Pinhead, or I guess you could say the Hellraiser. It's based on a book called The Hellbound Heart, well, really a short story by Clive Barker, and is one of the most notorious and iconic slasher franchises of the era. The series started, like I said, in the late 80s and is still ongoing to this day. There have been a couple of reboots, a more recent Hulu reimagining, and the series has been through a lot of ups and downs, but there are some very low points and some really high points too. So without further ado, let's get started with my ranking of Hellraiser. Coming in at number 11, Hellraiser Revelations. This thing is a steaming turd, and that's the best thing I can say about it. The film features a discount Pinhead and two douche nozzles that go to Mexico, find a puzzle box, and unleash hell. Really generic, really cheap, and a lazy attempt by the studio who own the rights to keep the rights. Nothing more, nothing less, and Doug Bradley even turned this piece of shit down, and he's been in some sneakers, so what does that tell you? Not a good film, full of characters that I hate and can't stand. Coming in at number 10 is Hellraiser Inferno. Just a lazy cash grab of a movie. Released in 2000, it was the first direct-to-video sequel to the franchise, and essentially shows a cop trying to hunt down a serial killer. He's an unlikable douchebag, and I couldn't wait until he died. Just the worst protagonist in this franchise. The only saving grace is our boy Doug Bradley as Pinhead. Everything else in this film is generic, and apart from one cameo by James Remar, there's nothing worth remembering in this film. A total turd. In ninth place, we have 2018's Hellraiser Judgment. The film was very unoriginal and features cops going after a serial killer. Sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? There is a new character called the Preceptor, and he's kind of interesting and basically types out your sins onto the paper, feeds it to, I guess, demons, and then they judge you based on what you've done in your life. Doug Bradley, once again, does not return as Pinhead, but the guy they got in this film is much better than the one in Revelations, and he does a serviceable job. Not a terrible film, but not one that's memorable at all. Next, we have 2004's Hellraiser Hellseeker. A very lazy, uninspired entry into the franchise. This film gets slight props over the ones lower on this list because Kirsty Cotton from the first three films technically does return, and it's nice to see her in the franchise again. The main character is a cubicle worker played by the guy who plays Mayhem in all the commercials, and every female in this movie is trying to jump this guy's bones. A rather uneventful entry into the franchise, but one that is tolerable, and one that I recommend if you want to see Kirsty Cotton again. Up next, we have Hellraiser Hell World. The film stars a group of nerds who are way more attractive than your average nerds, who play a game called Hell World, and sadly one of their friends committed suicide who got addicted to the game. The film's most notable aspect is that it stars Henry Cavill, that's right, Superman, as one of the leads. It's Superman versus Pinhead, baby. They go to this party, which is hosted by Lance Henriksen, and they run into Pinhead and the Cenobites, and all hell breaks loose. Not a bad entry, but very early 2000s. But watch if you want to see a fun movie with Pinhead and Superman. Up next, we have 2005's Hellraiser Deader. This film stars a female reporter who's investigating a cult called the Deaders, who could apparently bring people back to life. Along the way, it's revealed that Pinhead and the Cenobites are mixed up with this cult, and overall Hellraiser shenanigans ensue. This film, much like the previous few before it, weren't actually Hellraiser scripts. They were actually scripts based on short stories, and they just shoehorned in Pinhead and the puzzle box, known as the Lament configuration. Our protagonist must investigate this cult while witnessing flashbacks from her past and demons from her psyche. Definitely worth watching if you want to see a pretty good Hellraiser film with a good plot, even if it is a bit cheap at times. Next, we have 1996's Hellraiser Bloodline. This film shows the origins of the puzzle box and follows 3 generations of its creator's family as they all try to stop Pinhead and the Cenobites once and for all. Part of this film takes place in the Victorian era when the box was first created, and part of the film takes place in the future with his descendant trying to stop the puzzle box as well. The middle part of the movie also takes place in modern day, And of course, our boy Pinhead is along for the ride. Overall, an enjoyable installment, but one that is a bit janky and the last to be released theatrically. Next, we have the 2022 reboot, Hellraiser, released on Hulu. The first time in the series, we have a female like Pinhead, and it's actually pretty interesting to see Pinhead in this form, considering the fact that in the book, Pinhead's sex was actually rather androgynous. Puzzle Box does make a return in this film as well, but it also has several different forms, and the lament configuration is just one of many. Throughout the film, we see it change more and more until it has consumed enough souls to bring back the Cenobites as well as Pinhead into our world. The film stars a recovering drug addict, and she's trying to find her missing brother, as well as stay sober and stay sane as the Cenobites wreak havoc in her reality. There are some cool redesigns on the Cenobites, and the story here is pretty decent. It's essentially just a big budget version of Hellraiser 1 and 2 sandwiched together with a somewhat original plot. An enjoyable and fun entry into the franchise. In third place, we have Hellraiser 3, Hell on Earth, the first 90s Hellraiser movie. This film featured over-the-top MTV Cenobites, quite possibly the craziest designs of the entire franchise. The main protagonist this time is a female reporter who discovers the puzzle box as well as some of the victims of Pinhead and decides to investigate. Besides Pinhead, there's also this club owner named JP, and he more or less summons Pinhead by feeding him sacrifices, and that ultimately leads to, well, hell on earth. Doug Bradley really is hamming it up this time around, and we get a very fun and over-the-top Hellraiser film that is very 90s and very entertaining. For number 2, we have Hellbound, Hellraiser 2, released in 1988. This film sees the return of Kirsty Cotton, who's in a mental institution this time around, and she has to use her wits and knowledge of Pinhead and the Cenobites to close the gates of hell once and for all. Along the way, she also has the help of this girl who's a whiz at puzzles and is mute due to trauma she faced in her life. Pinhead, of course, makes his return here, and this is the first time where he seems to be going more over the top and less subtle than he was in the first film. His return is welcomed in this entertaining sequel. We also see the return of Julia, who is skinless at first and slowly regains her body due to sacrifices from a twisted doctor. He's essentially the catalyst for all the events of the movie, and thanks to him, we see the return of Pinhead and the Cenobites. All the classic Cenobites return here, and it's basically a direct continuation of the first film, and one that's very enjoyable. We get to see Hell, which is presented as a crazy labyrinth, which is watched over by the Lord of the Labyrinth. And it's a crazy and over-the-top sequel that I highly recommend. But nothing can beat the 1987 original, Hellraiser. The first time that we see Pinhead and the Cenobites also introduces us to Frank and the puzzle box. The film follows the protagonist, Kirsty, as she comes across the puzzle box after discovering her resurrected uncle, Frank, and the Cenobites. And she must use her wits and her survival instinct to return Frank to the Cenobites and save her own skin, possibly even quite literally. The film also stars Julia, which is Kirsty's stepmother, who seduces and kills men in an attempt to resurrect her lover, Frank, who she had an affair with on her wedding day. Pinhead, who banished Frank to their dimension, finds out about this, and he's none too happy, and he wants Frank back. Pinhead and his Cenobites aren't fucking around, and if they don't get Frank back, there will literally be hell to pay. It's up to Kirsty to try to return her uncle's soul to the Cenobites, or face the ultimate suffering. Pinhead is an iconic villain, and this film really cemented him as one of the best horror icons of all time, and the first film truly is an amazing work by Clive Barker. Highly recommended. And that's essentially my ranking of the Hellraiser franchise. This is a very entertaining series of films that I've always enjoyed. And there's always going to be room in my heart for Hellraiser. Half the films I think are pretty lackluster, but the first 4 I think are really great. 1 all the way to Bloodline. And I also really enjoy the Hulu remake. I will say, though, if you're a fan of the series, do avoid this set. The picture quality is fine for the most part, but Hellraiser 3, the whole reason I even bought this set, even though it says it's widescreen, is actually a full screen presentation. So great going, Miramax. You lied to people. But all in all, I do enjoy this series. I don't own most of the films because they're just on streaming, but I do have the first two somewhere around here, and I do have this collection as well as Bloodline on its own. I do recommend this to anyone who enjoys good horror and anyone who likes to be entertained. Thank you for watching. I'm really sorry this video was so delayed, but I've been so damn busy with work and life. But I'm glad that you guys do watch my videos, and I hope that you leave your list down below. And peace out.